that you want the young America. Young America, young America. Can't talk him, misunderstood again.
Imagine a time when music wasn't just about melody or lyrics. It was a battlefield, a cultural fault line, where legends clashed, critics sharpened their knives, and the very soul of popular music hung in the balance. David Bowie, the undisputed master of reinvention, the enigmatic Thin White Duke, a man who saw through the veneers of celebrity and commerce, and the Bee Gees. The harmonious Gibb brothers, who by the late 70s had become the undisputed kings of the global dance floor, selling tens of millions of records and defining an entire era. Two titans, seemingly orbiting different musical universes. Yet their paths collided in a way few remember, sparking a quiet but potent war of words that revealed deep anxieties about authenticity, artistry, and the ever-shifting definition of soul in music. Before we dive deep into this fascinating, often overlooked musical showdown, do me a huge favor. If you're as passionate about the untold stories of music history as I am, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. You don't want to miss a single beat here on RetroWaves. And if you enjoy this journey back in time, a quick thumbs up helps us reach more fellow music obsessives. Your support means the world. To truly understand the friction between these musical giants, we have to rewind to the mid-1970s. David Bowie, ever the provocateur, was undergoing yet another radical transformation. He'd shed the glitter and theatricality of Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane. He'd flirted with dystopian futures in Diamond Dogs. But by 1975, something new was brewing, something deeply personal, and in his own words, plastic. This was the era of Young Americans, an album Bowie famously, and somewhat controversially, dubbed Plastic Soul. Think about that phrase for a moment, plastic soul. It's an incredibly loaded term, especially coming from an artist who was then delving deep into the sounds of Philly soul, R&B, and funk. He was collaborating with legends like Luther Vandross, incorporating saxophone riffs that screamed Motown, and crafting grooves that were undeniably infectious. So why the self-deprecating, almost dismissive label? Bowie's intention was complex. On one hand, it was a self-aware, even humble acknowledgement of his own position. As a white British artist, he recognized he was entering a musical landscape largely defined by Black American artists. He wasn't claiming to be a soul singer in the traditional sense. He was interpreting it, filtering it through his unique artistic lens. It was a commentary on the commodification of black music, the way it was being packaged and sold to wider, predominantly white audiences, often stripping it of its raw edges and authentic roots. He saw the music industry, and even his own role within it, as part of a system that could dilute or plasticize genuine artistic expression. On the other hand, it also served as a subtle, perhaps even unintentional critique of a burgeoning musical movement that was starting to take over dance floors across the globe, disco. While Bowie's Plastic Soul wasn't a direct attack on disco itself, it encapsulated a sentiment shared by many rock purists and critics at the time. They saw disco as superficial, mass-produced, and lacking the authenticity or gravitas of rock music. It was often dismissed as music for dancing, not for thinking, a beat, not a statement. And in the eyes of many, this plasticity was becoming more and more prevalent. Now let's pivot to the Bee Gees. For years, the Gibb brothers, Barry, Robin, and Maurice, had been pop balladeers, known for their intricate harmonies, melancholic melodies, and heartfelt lyrics. They had enjoyed significant success in the late 60s and early 70s with songs like Massachusetts,
I'm going back to Massachusetts,
and How Can You Mend a Broken Heart? But by the mid-70s, their star was waning. They were trying to find their footing in a rapidly changing musical landscape. Their manager, Robert Stigwood, and producer Arif Mardin pushed them towards a more R&B, funk-influenced sound. This wasn't a natural progression for them, it was a conscious decision, born out of necessity and a keen ear for what was happening in the clubs. They started experimenting, particularly with Barry Gibb's falsetto, a vocal register he'd largely shied away from in their earlier work. This experimentation, fueled by the grooves of artists like Average White Band and the raw energy of Miami soul, led to a pivotal moment, their 1975 album, Main course. Suddenly, songs like Jive Talkin'
Jive talking, wear a disguise.
and Nights on Broadway
Blaming it all on the nights on Broadway.
weren't just hits, they were seismic shifts. These tracks showcased a funkier rhythm section, a more prominent bass line, and crucially, that soaring falsetto that would soon become their signature. They were embracing the groove, the danceability, and the pure, unadulterated joy that was radiating from the disco scene. They weren't just adapting, they were thriving in this new sonic environment. But even this transformation, successful as it was, couldn't have prepared them for the cultural juggernaut that was about to hit. Because in 1977, the entire world was about to experience a phenomenon that would not only redefine the Bee Gees' legacy, but also ignite a furious debate about the legitimacy of an entire genre, a phenomenon that would put their definition of rhythm directly at odds with the critical pronouncements of artists like David Bowie. We're talking, of course, about Saturday Night Fever, a movie, a soundtrack, a cultural touchstone that blasted disco out of the underground clubs and into every home, every radio, every corner of the planet. The Bee Gees, initially only contributing a few songs, ended up writing the bulk of the soundtrack, Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, More Than a Woman, How Deep Is Your Love, and many more. It wasn't just an album, it was the voice of a generation, a symbol of freedom, glamour, and escape. The success was unprecedented. The album spent 24 consecutive weeks at #1 on the Billboard charts and sold over 40 million copies worldwide, becoming one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time. The Bee Gees, once struggling, were now bigger than the Beatles, bigger than Elvis, at least in terms of concurrent chart dominance. They weren't just successful, they were ubiquitous. Their harmonies, their rhythms, their sound defined an era. But with such stratospheric success often comes backlash, and the backlash against disco, and by extension the Bee Gees, was brutal. Many critics, and a significant portion of the rock music establishment, viewed disco as simplistic, repetitive, and ultimately empty. It was everything authentic rock wasn't. And into this charged atmosphere of musical judgment stepped David Bowie, with his earlier prescient observation about plastic soul. While not directly aimed at the Bee Gees, his critique of the music industry's tendency to dilute or commercialize authentic sounds inadvertently set the stage for a simmering rivalry. Bowie's dismissal of plastic soul wasn't just about his own work, it was a commentary on what he perceived as a broader trend. And when the Bee Gees' brand of highly polished, incredibly catchy, and undeniably danceable disco swept the globe, it became a prime target for anyone who felt popular music was losing its edge, its grit, its soul. The lines were drawn. On one side, the enigmatic rock intellectual, deeply concerned with artistic integrity and the commodification of culture. On the other, the incredibly successful, harmonizing brothers who had accidentally become the undisputed kings of a genre, reviled by many of those same intellectuals. The year is 1979. The Bee Gees are at the absolute pinnacle of their career. Following the stratospheric success of the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, their next album, Spirits Having Flown, with its intricate harmonies, lush production, and global smashes like Tragedy and Love You Inside Out, is dominating charts worldwide. They are more than just a band, they are a cultural institution. They have transitioned from a beloved pop group into a global phenomenon, one so popular that they are nearly inescapable. Meanwhile, David Bowie, never one to be pinned down by a single sound or image, had already moved on. He had left behind the American soul sound of Young Americans and the icy experimental landscapes of his Berlin trilogy to release his pop-savvy album, Lodger. Bowie was a restless artist, always chasing the next sound, the next idea. But even as he evolved, his earlier critiques of mass-produced, sanitized music lingered in the air, a sentiment now amplified by a furious public backlash. That backlash had a name, and it was "Disco Sucks." This wasn't just a dismissive phrase, it was a rallying cry, a movement, a tidal wave of musical resentment that was about to hit the Bee Gees full force. Fueled by rock radio stations, critics who viewed disco as a threat, and a segment of the audience that saw it as a sellout genre, Disco Sucks came to a violent and infamous head at Chicago's Comiskey Park on July 12, 1979. The event, Disco Demolition Night, was conceived by rock DJ Steve Dahl. Fans of rock and roll were invited to bring disco records to the ballpark, which were then collected and ceremoniously blown up in a massive, theatrical bonfire. But the event was far more than a stunt. It quickly descended into a near riot, with thousands of angry, inebriated fans rushing the field, burning records, and tearing up the turf. It was so chaotic that the police were called, and the White Sox had to forfeit the second game of their doubleheader. What started as a simple protest against a music genre had become an expression of deep-seated racial, class, and cultural anxieties. For many, disco was seen as frivolous, overproduced, and the opposite of the raw, authentic rock music they revered. It was music created for dancing in clubs, not for listening with gravitas. And who was the poster child for everything they wanted to destroy? The Bee Gees. The group's polished sound, their unmistakable falsetto, their tailored suits, their meticulously crafted harmonies, they were the very embodiment of the disco they wanted to obliterate. They became collateral damage in a cultural war, even though their musical roots were in rock and R&B. They were victims of their own monumental success, of being so big that they became an easy target for a frustrated, reactive audience. The backlash was brutal and deeply personal for the Gibb brothers. For an artist who had dedicated his life to music, to be so reviled and so dismissed was devastating. Robin Gibb, in particular, was a sensitive artist who felt the sting of the Disco Sucks movement keenly. It wasn't just critics calling their music plastic anymore, it was millions of people chanting for the destruction of their art. The charts, once a testament to their genius, now became a public record of their perceived artistic decline. In this hypercharged atmosphere of musical judgment, the comments we're focusing on were made in a candid moment during an interview. Robin Gibb was asked about the musical landscape and the critics who had dismissed disco, a group that implicitly included David Bowie. This is when the famous quote was delivered. Robin Gibb, with a touch of frustration and a defender's pride, reportedly said that David Bowie simply didn't understand rhythm. Now let's unpack that. It's a statement that seems almost too simple, too blunt, but its layers reveal everything we need to know about this quiet feud and the artistic philosophies at war. On the surface, it sounds like an artist lashing out at a critic, but underneath, it's a brilliant, even poetic rebuttal. When Bowie talked about plastic soul, he was talking about authenticity. He was concerned with the origins of the music, the realness of the emotion, the grit of the performance. He was the intellectual, the deconstructionist, the artist who was always a step ahead, commenting on the very art form he was creating. His focus was on the depth of the music, its intellectual and emotional weight. He was an artist who spent his career dissecting genres, trying to understand their essence, then reassembling them in his own, often abstract form. He saw the music industry as a machine that smoothed out the rough edges and genuine feeling for mass consumption. Robin Gibb's retort, that Bowie didn't understand rhythm, shifts the entire argument. He's not defending the soul of disco or its intellectual depth. He's talking about its very purpose, the beat, the rhythm, the groove. He's saying in essence that Bowie and the critics who agreed with him were too caught up in analyzing the music's plasticity to feel what it was actually doing to people. They were too busy thinking about the music to get up and dance to it. For the Bee Gees, the genius of their disco sound wasn't about being gritty or raw. It was in the flawless construction of the beat, the intricate, interlocking bass lines of Maurice, the precise, unwavering pulse of the drums from studio musicians like Dennis Bryan, and the subtle yet driving guitar of Barry. It was the hypnotic pulse that compelled millions of people to move, to forget their problems, and to lose themselves on the dance floor. It was the rhythm that united people from all walks of life under the spinning disco ball. Robin was pointing out that this kinetic physical power was a form of artistic expression in itself, one as valid as any complex chord progression or abstract lyric. It was a language the critics and perhaps Bowie simply didn't speak. This clash represents a foundational tension in all of music, the battle between the cerebral and the visceral, between the intellectual and the emotional. Bowie was the architect, constantly building and deconstructing sonic landscapes. He saw music as a vehicle for ideas and for personal transformation. The Bee Gees in their disco era were the master engineers of a specific powerful emotion, joy and communal release through rhythm. They weren't trying to change the world with concepts, they were trying to move it with a beat. The legacy of this feud is fascinating because both artists were ultimately vindicated, though in very different ways. David Bowie's critiques of the music industry's commercialism were proven correct time and again. His legacy as an artist who refused to be pinned down by one genre or identity is secure. His work is revered for its intellectual depth and its fearless exploration of new sounds. But the Bee Gees' legacy also had the last laugh. While they suffered a period of intense public dismissal, and the Disco Sucks movement left a bitter stain on their careers, time has been incredibly kind to their disco catalog. The very same songs that were once derided as plastic are now considered classics. The craftsmanship, the harmonies, and yes, the rhythm are now seen for what they were all along, musical genius. Today, Stayin' Alive isn't just a hit song, it's a permanent part of the cultural zeitgeist, a musical symbol of hope and resilience. Their music, once a battleground, is now a source of nostalgia and universal admiration. In the end, neither artist was truly right or wrong. They were both speaking from their own artistic truths. David Bowie was looking for the heart and soul in music's ever-changing form. The Bee Gees, through Robin's simple, powerful retort, reminded the world that sometimes the true soul of music isn't in a lyric or a concept, but in the fundamental, undeniable power of the beat, the rhythm. This quiet clash of words between two legends of music isn't just a historical footnote, it's a timeless lesson in artistry, criticism, and the beautiful, complex ways we choose to define what music truly means to us. Thank you for joining me on RetroWaves. If you enjoyed this journey back in time, don't forget to hit that like button and share this with another music fanatic. We'll be back with another deep dive into the stories behind the music that shaped our world. See you next time.